The most senior lawyers in your own administration and on your campaign told you that after you'd lost more than 60 legal challenges, that it was over. Why did you ignore them and decide to listen to a new outside group?
Because I didn't respect them.
You'd hired
lawyers,
them.
Sure, but that doesn't mean, you hire them, you never met these people, you get a recommendation, they turn out to be rhinos or they turn out to be not so good. In many cases, I didn't respect them, but I did respect others. I respected many others that said the election was rigged.
You called some of your outside lawyers, you said they had crazy theories. Why were you listening to them? Were you listening to them because they were telling you what you wanted to hear?
You know who I listened to myself? I saw what happened. I watched that election, and I thought the election was over at 10 o'clock in the evening.
You were listening to your instincts.
My instincts are a big part of it. That's been the thing that's gotten me to where I am, my instincts. But I also listen to people. There are many lawyers. I could give you many books. There are books that are written on how the election was rigged. There are numerous books that were written on how the election was rigged.
Just to be clear, were you listening to your lawyer's advice or were you listening to your own instincts?
I was listening to different people, and when I added it all up, the election was rigged. There are books
were you
that
calling
are written.
The shots, though?
In fact, Molly Hemingway wrote a great book.
But were you
called
calling
Rigged.
the shots ultimately?
Excuse me. Molly Hemingway, who's highly respected and great, she wrote a book, a best-selling book called Rigged.
Were you calling the shots, though, Mr. President, ultimately?
As to whether or not I believed it was rigged, oh, sure.
Okay.
It was my decision, but I listened to some people. Some people said that. Like guys like Bill Barr, he was a stiff, but he wasn't there at the time. But he didn't do his job because he was afraid. You know what he was afraid of? He was afraid of being impeached. He was petrified to be impeached. And how do you not get impeached? Don't do anything.
This is Michael Popok, Legal AF. Well, with that interview Donald Trump just gave to Kristen Welker on Meet the Press, he's helped immeasurably Jack Smith in his ability to prove the element that keeps prosecutors up at night. Criminal intent, mens rea. And in doing so, Donald Trump also eliminated a major defense that we all thought he was going to try to rely on, which is that the lawyers told me to do it. At the end, Donald Trump just told Kristen Welker, you just heard it, a couple of amazing things that go to his criminal prosecution and go to mens rea and his criminal intent and mind. He said that there were people in his administration that were his lawyers, I'll go over and catalog them in a minute, who told him that he had lost the election, there had been no fraud in the election. In fact, we know, and Jack Smith knows better, that there are at least 15 or 20 data points, not including the 60 lawsuits that he lost, in which he or any reasonable person, and that's the standard, not what crazy Donald Trump thinks, in order to try to steal an election, what a reasonable person would think, that he lost the election fair and square to Joe Biden, but not to Donald Trump. When Donald Trump didn't get the right answers out of the people he put in his own administration, lawyers that are well respected, at least at the time, like Pat Cipollone, the White House counsel, his deputy Eric Hirschman, Bill Barr, Jeff Rosen, the replacement for Bill Barr, the deputy attorney general, all the judges, 60 of them around the country, mainly federal, that ruled against his attempts to overthrow the election with fraud cases, the secretaries of states of all of the states, including the battleground states, who certified their election results as being free from fraud or outcome determinative fraud. You cannot, under the reasonable person standard, bury your head in the sand against the weight of all of this evidence and just say, I don't like it. I'm going to go with Team Crazy, captained by Rudy Giuliani, Sidney Powell, Jenna Ellis, Ken Chesbro, the Pillow guy, the Overstock.com guy, and anybody else that you polled in order to get the result that you were looking for. That's not the criminal standard that's going to be used in a courtroom. It might make for interesting television, although I'm sure this was a white knuckle moment for the lawyers, the criminal lawyers representing Donald Trump, who I'm sure did not want him to go on television destroying any reliance on attorney's defense, which he just did. There's a couple of major lies in his interview that I want to talk about and explode and debunk right here on this hot take exclusively on the MeidasTouch network. Firstly, that he didn't know these people, right? So he goes from being, I'm the commander in chief, I'm in charge, I'm the leader of the free world, to I hardly knew these people. I just went down to Home Depot and they were just hanging around looking for a day job. So I hired them to be my attorney general, my White House counsel, my deputy White House counsel, the deputy attorney generals, the lawyers representing me in all those cases, the judges that I nominated and were confirmed. You know, I didn't really know any of these people. That's a lie. I'll give you one example as that being a lie. Eric Hirschman, who people might remember, he's the one who colorfully said to John Eastman, repeat after me, peaceful transfer of power. Now get yourself an effing criminal lawyer because you're going to need it. That Eric Hirschman. Eric Hirschman worked as a partner and is now back at that firm, a firm called Kasowitz Benson. Kasowitz Benson, led by Mark Kasowitz, had been Donald Trump's law firm forever. He has used Mark Kasowitz before Alina Habba was an old white guy named Mark Kasowitz. Okay? That's who represented Donald Trump in a lot of his business dealings. And Eric Hirschman was Mark's partner. And of course he knows who Eric Hirschman was because he came from the Kasowitz law firm. That's one. But even bigger bombshell is this, his constant, it was almost like he had Tourette's, his constant repeat of Molly Hemingway's name during that interview with Kristen Welker. Molly Hemingway wrote a book. Molly Hemingway wrote a book. Molly Hemingway wrote a book called Rigged. He didn't say he relied on Molly Hemingway's book, which was written after the election, couldn't have been used while Donald Trump was actually making the decisions to be a criminal. But that aside for a minute, Molly Hemingway of the Federalist, who calls herself a journalist and put out a book called Rigged, appeared on places like Fox News. And she was asked point blank by Tucker Carlson. Remember when he used to be on Fox News? Asked point blank by Tucker Carlson in an interview I'm going to show you next, where he said to her, let me just ask you what our listeners want to know. Was there fraud in the election? This is the quote that was used. Here's what Tucker said to him. Tucker asked her directly, do you think there was widespread fraud in the last election? Watch Molly Hemingway as she fumbles around to give an answer, and then watch Tucker Carlson with his pause at the end indicating he didn't get the answer he was looking for. Let's roll that video.
Do you think there was widespread fraud in the last election?
I think that what's important, it's important to think about what happened in general. You want free and fair and transparent and accurate elections. In order to have free and fair and transparent elections, you also need to have, a media that is behaving responsibly. You need to not have a society that engages in censorship. You need to not have rules of voting that make it impossible to detect fraud. This is why people care so much about how the rules are set going in. And so it was, we saw this throughout the campaign. They would send out ballots in some states where people were getting, 6 or more ballots sent to their house. They're also being told that this is an existential threat, whether they can get rid of Donald Trump or not, and creating permission structures for doing things that are quite radical. It's a very complex approach, but it's absolutely important.
It is important.
Okay, there you have it. Tucker winds up the guest. Here you go. Here's the money shot. Do you think there was widespread fraud in the last election? And she babbles on with, I think that what's important, it's important to think about what happened in general. You want free and fair and transparent, accurate elections, then in order to have them, you also need to have a media that's behaving responsibly, and you don't want censorship. Okay, Molly, so I'll put you down for no. You don't think there's fraud in the election. In fact, the classic I almost fell over was Tucker's response. He just stood there impassively. I can't wait to read your book. That's what happens and then you go back and fire the producers because he was expecting a different answer. The reason she didn't answer it that way is that's not the premise of the book. That's the premise of the title to sell, in clickbait fashion to sell books. But that's not the premise of her book. And the big argument is that Donald Trump's relying on mail-in ballots because we had COVID. a COVID pandemic that he didn't cure, didn't fix fast enough, didn't take seriously enough while he was president, and it happened during the election. And rather than have millions of people die standing in line, a lot of states decided, let's use what's already on the books, mail-in ballots. They're safe and secure. They're just as secure as a regular ballot. That's why we allow them. It's not like, well, the best ballots are the ones where people stand in line all day and cast them at some sort of machine. And in fact, this isn't like an NBA game. Those are like 3-point ballots. And the ballots that get mailed in, we can't really trust those. Absentee ballots and mail-in ballots, the kind of ballots Donald Trump and Melania Trump have used for years. We can't trust those as much. We'll give them 1 point. That's a 1-pointer. Okay? The better ballots, and then Donald Trump says during the interview with Welker, I thought I won on the end of the night. Well, that's because you don't understand how elections work. You don't understand how vote counting works. And you don't understand how mail-in ballots work. And you had been told time and time again that the Democrats had run up big numbers in early voting and mail-in voting. And because you, Donald Trump, undermine the integrity of early voting and mail-in voting, your voters didn't use it. And so your voters you had to rely on to stand in a line all day in order to vote for you. Whereas the Democrats had already early voted such a vast majority that it would have taken, as you can see, 7 million plus 1 extra voters to wait in line in order for you to equalize what Joe Biden and the Democratic machine did. That's the reality. That's what they don't like. That's what they call fraud. So when you hear fraud by a Republican friend or somebody that supports Donald Trump, think they don't like mail-in and absentee balloting because that's what was and early voting because that's what was used as the ground game for the Democrats to win and put Joe Biden into the White House. And they don't like it. And they think it's changing the rules in the middle of the game. You know what changed the rules in the middle of the game? COVID. A pandemic that was killing millions of people. Look around, Donald. We don't have 1.5 million people in this country because they died because you didn't take COVID seriously. Okay? Many of them were your voters because you so convinced them until you were dying from COVID that they shouldn't take medicine, vaccine, boosters, and the like, right? They should inject themselves with Lysol or whatever it was you thought was going to be appropriate for people. That's where we are with the 2 clips. So on this hot take, today, Donald Trump destroyed his mens rea, his criminal intent argument, and helped prove that point, which is a key element for a prosecutor like Jack Smith to prove, and for Fani Willis to prove criminal mind and criminal intent. He destroyed his reliance on counsel, that he was going to blame it on the idiots. He was going to blame it on Sidney Powell and Jenna Ellis and Rudy Giuliani, who we also now refer to as co-conspirators in Georgia election interference case. But no, he said, no, I don't like the people that were telling me I lost. Those are the people that I don't trust. They were rhinos. What does that have to do with anything? What does your party affiliation have to do with telling the president the truth, speaking truth to power, right? Instead of surrounding yourself with a bunch of bootlickers who told you exactly what you wanted to hear. And Molly Hemingway, first of all, I know you kept, Mr. Trump, I know you kept interrupting Kristen Welker to tell her, excuse me, Molly Hemingway, go read the book. I know you really don't read books, but have somebody read it for you because that's not what the book says. You just saw the clip on Tucker Carlson. Which completely, she didn't even say that there's fraud in the election when asked point blank the question. And Molly Hemingway also has, go look her up. She's got a number of crackpot things that she said on social media. She said the Charlottesville march by the white supremacists, the far right, alt-right, that led to the death of at least 2 people on the ground was a hoax. She said that the insurrection or the attack on the Capitol on Jan 6th. And she said people that refer to that as an insurrection led by unarmed people for a few hour attack, an insurrection, that they're bad people. Go read the Jan 6 transcripts. Go watch the Jan 6 sentencing and the things that we're learning about what happened on that day from testimony. and in courtrooms around the country, including in the District of Columbia. Learn about the 5 people that died. Learn about the blood that wetted the steps leading up to the Capitol. That was reminiscent, according to one Capitol police officer, of her time in Fallujah. Before you say that the people that comment on that are wrong or not patriotic. So, Molly Hemingway, Federalist, writes for the Federalist, writes books that's catnip for Donald Trump's cult followers. That's his defense, the Molly Hemingway defense. I'd feel better if he had an Ernest Hemingway defense. At least I'd feel like it was credible, at least literary. But Molly Hemingway and interrupt Kristen Welker in order to insert it, I'm telling you, it was a white knuckle experience for the defense lawyers. I'm a defense lawyer. This is the last place I want my client to be, is giving silly interviews where he slits his own throat on national television. But that's what just happened. I reported on places, on one place only, the MeidasTouch Network, on their YouTube channel, on hot takes like this one. And during the week, Wednesdays and Saturdays, I co-anchor and co-founded Legal AF, one place exclusively, MeidasTouch Network, where we curate the best stories that you need to know at that corner of politics and law, U.S. politics and law. And if you like what I'm doing here, give me a thumbs up. It helps with the ratings and the algorithm. And you can follow me, Michael Popok, at MS Popok on all things social media. Until my next hot take and Legal AF, this is Michael Popok reporting.
At MeidasTouch, we are unapologetically pro-democracy, and we demand justice and accountability. That's why we're spreading our message to Convict 45. That's right, gear up right now with your Convict 45 tees and pins at store.meidastouch.com. That's store.meidastouch.com.